Be'ezrat Hashem, the Gemara this morning, Pessachim, page 106a. Tanu Rabbanan, Chachamim teach us, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat lekadosho. The Torah tells you, remember to the Shabbat and sanctify it. How do we sanctify the Shabbat? Zochreu al hayayin. The Gemara is telling us, you sanctify the Shabbat on wine. The truth is, we sanctify the Shabbat in the prayer on Friday night before we get to the table. And we say over there a blessing, Baruch atah Hashem mekadesh Shabbat. Coming to the Shabbat table, ready to do Kiddush, we say also the same blessing, Baruch atah Hashem mekadesh Shabbat. So one of them is a Torah commandment, and the other one is a rabbinical commandment. So if you're planning to sit down and eat, so the prayer is considered rabbinical, and the Kiddush on the wine is from a Torah obligation. But if somebody cannot eat on Friday night, unfortunately, he has a situation where he cannot eat, so he would sanctify the Shabbat through words in the prayer of Friday night. Now, we sanctify the Shabbat on Friday night, and we sanctify the Shabbat on Shabbat morning, right? And we also take a cup of wine to accompany the Shabbat coming out, which is Motzei Shabbat. Now, the big Kiddush, the big sanctification is done on Friday night. In the morning, is just to give honor to the meal that we are about to have, right? So that's why in the morning, the Kiddush is very small. What do we say? Baruch atah Savri Meranan, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu Mechaolam Borei Peri Agefen, right? So in night, there's a whole text to say, two big paragraphs to say. In total, there's in this two paragraphs on Friday night, 70 words. Says the Zohar. Why? Because the word yain, wine, yud and nun, yud is 10, Yud is 10 and Nun in variable number is 50, makes 70, right? And that's very important, not to skip any words. So if you're in a situation, you go over to friends or you have grandparents coming and somebody is making the Kiddush, but this somebody does not pronounce good the Kiddush and he swallows the words or he skips words, but you're too embarrassed to tell him, in this case, you should say the Kiddush to yourself quietly, so you should make sure having those 70 words, right? So now, what happens if you could not have done the Kiddush on Friday night? Is there a catching up on Shabbat morning? So the Gemara is teaching us the following story. The Gemara says that Rav Ashi, one of the biggest rabbi in Talmud, Ikla leMechoza, came to the city called Machoza. Amru lo lekiddush lan mar kiddush rabba. You should make us the big kiddush. Big kiddush. So he was thinking to himself, what do they mean? Do they mean that last night, Friday night, they didn't do kiddush? Because Friday night's kiddush is much bigger than Shabbat morning. So maybe they skipped last night's kiddush. What? The whole community didn't do Shabbat's kiddush? How is it possible? But then he says, I don't know what they mean. So he didn't know what to do. So what did he do? He started saying, Savir Ma'anan, Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu Mechaolam Borei Peri Agefen. Says the Gemara, he was prolonging the word Borei Peri Agefen. Then he saw an old man in the crowd putting the cup towards his lips and starting to drink. So he understood that the meaning was not the Friday night Kiddush, it was the Shabbat Kiddush. So then he drank it and he understood that he did his obligation. So why did they call it the big Kiddush? So the Gemara says the reason is not to embarrass Shabbat morning Kiddush. So we call it the big Kiddush, right? So in order to give it importance, what do? We add some verses to the Kiddush of Shabbat morning. What do we say? Im tashiv mi Shabbat raglecha sof chavatzecha bil kodeshi. We put a lot of verses together, and at the end we come, Savri Maranan, Baruch atah Hashem, Borei Peri Agefen. So he understood that the Shabbat morning Kiddush is called the big Kiddush, even though it's smaller, but in honor of this in honor of Shabbat morning, we call it the big Kiddush. So now, you have to understand something. If somebody for some reason could not have done Kiddush on Friday night, he can still catch up on Shabbat morning. Like in this case, Rav Ashi didn't know what to do. He thought to himself, do they mean that they have to catch up from last night, or do they mean just Shabbat? And then he saw they meant the Shabbat Kiddush. But he also took in possibility, right, in consideration of a possibility that it could have done the Friday night Kiddush. How do you catch up on a Friday night Kiddush on Shabbat morning? So the Chachamim, the Shulchan Aruch tells us the following thing. You cannot start from the beginning of Kiddush of Friday night because it's not Friday night anymore. What do we say in the beginning of Friday night Kiddush? We start the Kiddush with words, Yom HaShishi vaychulu hashamayim va'aretz. Yom HaShishi, but it's not Yom Shishi, it's already Yom Shabbat. It's already Shabbat. We cannot say Yom Shishi. So basically, what do? You skip the first part of the Kiddush of Friday night. So if you miss Friday night Kiddush, coming to the table Shabbat morning, after the prayer, you start the Kiddush by saying, Savri Maranan, Baruch Ata Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, Borei Pnei Gefen. But you don't drink the wine. You have to continue. Baruch Ata Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, Asher Kideshanu mitzvotav, Veratza banu, Veshabbat kodsho, Be'ava uvratzon yechilanu, and so on and so on. You get to the end, Baruch Ata Hashem, Mekadesh Shabbat, and then you drink. And this is catching up for the Kiddush was not done on Friday night. This thing has to be done, could be done the whole Shabbat, which means if somebody didn't have a chance to do Kiddush Friday night and not Shabbat in the morning, he can still do Kiddush in the afternoon. He can do Sudah Shlishit, he can do a meal and say the Kiddush and catch up. Till when? Just before sunset. Before sunset, he can still catch up on the Kiddush of Friday night. But hopefully, if we're lucky, Bezrat Hashem, we should be able to do Kiddush on Friday night, on Shabbat morning, and Shabbat afternoon, and Shabbat, Motzei Shabbat, to accompany the Queen Shabbat. I wish you a great day. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.